Hello. Alright, so this is going to be our first completely new session of Apothecaria. So we're through the sessions that I had streamed previously last year. So this will be completely new stuff. The previous two episodes, streams, are going to be on my YouTube channel. If you have not watched them, I was waiting for one to upload earlier, so it should be available here probably right after this stream. And then the second week, the second session should be available hopefully by tonight. It shouldn't take long because that one was pretty easy. It will just be the upload of the VOD. So yeah, I think we will probably just get started. So let me get us moved over. Here we go. And so last week we ended with Marcius doing the calling where they're familiar. So that is where we're picking up right after that. April 17th, 5th week of spring. Having Briar around has been an adjustment, but a welcome one. The past 3 days had been spent with us getting to know each other. It has been slow at first, carefully sitting in each other's presence and the way we complimented each other. She disappeared briefly towards the evening on the second day. I feared that Briar had decided I wasn't worth her time, that maybe she could sense how inept I had been in the past and didn't want to risk relying on me. When it turned dark and she hadn't returned, I had accepted that I had been found wanting, and a deep pain had settled in my chest. Card drawn for Briar's skill. Was a 6, which is the skill of ways. I had sat on the porch as the sun set on me with these depressed thoughts when I'd been startled by a nudge to my arm. I found Briar there, standing beside me, a softly glowing plant held in her mouth that she seemed to offer to me. When I took it from her, I found that she had brought me a clump of moon lotus. The flowers were open now that the sun was set and their stamen glowed with the soft blue moonlight. So Ways allows Briar to bring one specific type of reagent to us whenever we need it. And the reagent that she has brought to us is the moon lotus. So we now have moon lotus times 1 in our inventory. I realized that she was showing me how best she could help. The moon lotus was something she must have been attuned to that allowed her to locate it for me if I had need. I carefully took the flowers in hand, knew then that Briar had chosen me despite the failings that haunted me. This morning, as I looked out the window over a fresh cup of coffee, I watched her as she grazed on the dew-covered grass of the meadow around the house. I had waited so long to call another companion. I'd let the fear of another loss keep me from risking it. That fear was there tenfold in my chest as she seemed to sense my gaze and lifted her head to look back at me. I knew I would protect her fiercely and felt that assurance that she would do the same for me. We set out midday, the moon lotus hanging near the door to dry, a reagent I would hold on to rather than use as a reminder. I wanted to try and make it out to one of the other marked locations on the old witch's map. This one was marked with a symbol that seemed This one was marked with a symbol of what seemed to be a quill that was followed with a question mark. I hoped that possibly it meant it was one of the last locations the previous witch had gone before disappearing. I hadn't been certain if Briar would follow along, but as soon as I set out on the path, she followed in that silent way that only creatures of the forest could achieve. Glimmerwood Grove. Card drawn for the event is a 5. The location I aimed to search was within the woods, but to the east, away from the loch. It was a part of the grove I hadn't explored much previously, off trail and through the moss-blanketed undergrowth. Briar trailed behind me with no sense of urgency, which served as a comfortable reassurance that there wasn't danger nearby. It was difficult without a trail to know for certain where I was in relation to the marked location on the map. There were a few landmarks noted, but knowing how things could shift with time, I worried I had missed some sign. We stopped under the cool shade from a grove of trees that grew so close together they almost seemed like one. I closed my eyes and tried to pull on some magic to do a simple guidance spell and hope it would help direct us. Briar alerted me that we weren't alone anymore, with a light nudge to my back. I snapped my eyes open and turned to find who or what had caught Briar's attention, and found Emery's, who had gave me an apologetic look. Briar trotted over to them, and the druid held a hand out in greeting to her with a smile. Any wariness that I would typically feel seemed to melt away at the image of them together. Briar's approval shouldn't have been a surprise given Emery's gentle disposition I had previously seen. It was still a sort of confirmation that gave me a sense of ease this far out into the wilderness. Emery's and I both expressed how nice it was to meet again. I hadn't been certain I'd come across them again, but it felt like good fortune to do so. They asked what I was searching for, apparently able to pick up on the sense of my guidance spell, and I explained with some hope that they'd know the exact spot. That hope was unfortunately fleeting as they looked perplexed at the markings, and I tried instead mentioning the possible base camps tucked away around the area. Unbidden, Emery stepped over to look at the map with me to try and help find our bearings. I noted that they moved as silently as Briar across the forest floor, and in such close proximity I could catch the scent of wild flowers and a hint of earthy decay that seemed to cling to them. It made them seem all the more like a part of the woods. They seemed to recognize something on the map, with a soft exclamation as they pointed to a noted hillside. We weren't far from where the hill rose, and the quill-marked site was just north of it. Emery's, a hint of curiosity around them, offered to walk with us, and I took them up on it. As we walked, Emery's asked if I had been able to help the patient I'd been gathering ingredients for when we'd first met. I thought back on Leo, who I've not heard from since curing his dragon sickness, and confirmed that I'd been able to help him. I hesitated for a while before I asked about the former witch. Emery's grew quiet at mention of her. Her hand reached to trail down along Briar's side, as if for comfort, before simply stating it had been a long time since they'd seen her. They seemed to get lost in thought for a while then, and I didn't want to push. Perhaps I should have. Perhaps I would have gotten answers faster if I cared less for the feelings of others. But I couldn't bring myself to push and risk upsetting my companion. We walked in silence for a while before I noted that the grade of the forest floor seemed to shift, indicating the foot of the hill. Emery's directed us then to turn northward. As we did so, they changed the subject to Briar. Card drawn for the next event was a jack. I explained that I had called upon her just recently, and felt a sense of pride when Emerys commented that I must have a kind heart to call one such Briar to me. I don't know how much I believed that, but I appreciated that I seemed worthy. The ground changed to more rocky as we got further north along the hill, and it seemed more and more that we were on some kind of trail. The trees still grew close and hung overhead, but the ground seemed trodden, and slowly I noticed the azure bricks peeked out from between the moss and dirt. The brickwork overtook the dirt as we went until it was clear we had entered some type of ruins. I heard Emery's give a quiet exclamation of surprise, and looked up to meet with the gaudy view of a golden throne. Someone sat upon the throne, and I felt a twinge of irritation. I did my best to hide as I recognized the elvish features of the individual I'd met at the Standing Stones some weeks back. He laughed a bit impishly as he saw the expression on my face and gave a wide grin. Though calm beside me, I felt Emery's rest their hand on my wrist in a way that seemed both as a warning and a search for reassurance. He introduced himself as Morrow. I have no doubt that isn't his true name, but at the least I have a name to call him now. I asked him if he'd gotten lost on the way to the loch, and his grin sharpened. Still, he seemed more amused than anything. Morrow welcomed us, though his eyes seemed to stay on me alone as he made an offer. He stated since we had come to visit, he was willing to offer a story in exchange for a gift. His focus dipped down to the map I held in my hands, and I shoved it into my pack. The map wasn't something I'd be willing to part with. I had, at least, planned ahead this time with the thought I may come across some pixies once again. I had brought along a jar of sweet honey I'd bought in the market during my last trip, along with some of the remaining gemstones left behind by Leo after he'd been cured. I took a second to decide and chose to offer Morrow a couple of the gemstones. The honey, I admit, I somewhat covet for myself. I would be willing to part with it perhaps under a different situation, but I was somewhat loath to offer it to Morrow. I pulled the gemstones from a pocket sewn into the side of my satchel and offered them up. Emery's, seemingly out of that same curiosity that had led them to join me earlier, offered their own gift. They pulled free from their own satchel the glittering gem-encrusted antler of a local deer that dwelled in the woods. Morrow seemed to survey these gifts for a few moments, seeming disappointed, but he still gathered them up greedily from us in the end. He told us a story, as he said he would, and I've done my best to detail it here below, though I doubt there is much use in it. I feel it is familiar in some ways, but it is not a story I recognize having heard before, despite this. A story from Marrow. There once was a serpent who longed for a rose. He would slither through the garden each day to stare up at its petals longingly and with utter admiration. It had tried to reach her, but each time he would try to climb the twisted brambles, the thorns would force him to retreat. There once was a rose who knew her time was short. Each day she would stare up at the sun to cherish its warmth. She held tightly to her petals as long as she could, not wanting them to fall and drift away from her. armed her thorns against those who may threaten her. And last, there was a raven who wanted nothing more than a bit of fun. He watched the snake stare futilely up at the rose. He watched the rose soak in the sun as she clung to her beauty and youth far longer than any rose should. He waited for their stalemate to end, but grew bored as things wore on the same day after day. So the raven one day flew down to the ground near the serpent and asked what he desired more. I desire to be with the rose, but I cannot reach her due to the thick thorns that threaten each time I try, the raven nodded. What if I could get you up to where she is? I can fly, you see, and I could carry you with me. I can even go up now and ask if she would be willing to make room among her thorns for me to set you. Oh, please, I dream of nothing else, replied the serpent. The raven grinned and flew up to carefully land on a bramble near the rose. Even he had to take care of the thorns, but he found a spot to perch where she could not ignore his presence as he blocked out the sun. Move! I need the sunlight, all that I can get, for it keeps me young and my petals the deepest of reds. Rose chastised him angrily, and the raven couldn't help but to laugh. The sun can scorch as well as nurture. Careful you don't get too much, or it may cause you to wilt even faster. Liar, Rose spoke defiantly, but the raven could tell he had instilled a doubt in her as she no longer tried to chase him off. What if I told you I knew a way to get your petals an even darker and more beautiful crimson color? The raven heard the rose scoff at the mere suggestion and shrugged at the dismissal. He waited, biding his time as he knew she would not be able to resist now that the thought had been embedded. Not that I believe you, but how exactly would you do so? A tricky bit of magic, but I know the steps to take. It does require a sacrifice to complete, however, and that can be hard to come by, but there, below. Do you see the serpent there? He has long wanted to breach your defenses. Just now he asked if I would fly him up here to where he could get to you. I could do just that, but you will be prepared. Ready your sharpest thorns, and when I drop him, his sacrifice will complete the spell. What do you say? The raven tilted his head to the side as he waited for the rose's answer. She had, perhaps for the first time, looked away from the sun to notice the serpent below. He played his part unwittingly by coiling in such a way to make his scales flash as he attempted to put on an appealing display. Yes, fly him up to me and drop him. I will drive my thorns through him like daggers, and you can do your magic to heighten my beauty even more. The raven gave a laugh, pleased at his ploy, as he flew down to the serpent once more. Come, she wishes to meet you, he exclaimed to the serpent excitedly, already finding mirth in his plan going so smoothly. The serpent slithered to him, coiled, and let the raven take him in his claws to fly upward. They flew up and up past the rose, who the raven saw already her thorns. The serpent's attention was so enthralled by the rose as he got the closest to her he'd ever been, that he didn't even sense the danger in the fact they were now above the thorny brambles. The rose was so eager to prolong and deepen her beauty, she didn't seem to notice how they hovered directly above her petals. The raven let the serpent go, and he plunged down onto the rose's brambles. The sharp thorns impaled him. The serpent's elation suddenly turned to pain and panic as he thrashed about. The rose, at first gleeful, began to panic as well, as the serpent's death throes began to violently shake her brambles. The tail of the serpent whipped unknowingly down and hit the rose, knocking her petals free and destroying her careful control. The raven laughed as he watched as they both got what they had hoped for. The serpent, falling still as the thorns stole his last breath, was curled close to what remained of his rose. The rose's petals, scattered on the forest floor beneath them both, stained red, with the dripping blood of the serpent, turning them a richer and darker color than she had ever achieved before. Marrow grinned at us as he had finished his tale in a way that made me feel he resembled the raven from this story. Emrys stood next to me as they observed him with a contemplative expression I couldn't quite pin down, before simply thanking him for his time. I felt at the moment that following Emrys' lead was perhaps best, so I did the same. I got the same sense I had the first time I'd met Morrow along the trail. That sense that I would need to be careful that he didn't double back upon me. I excused us then, stated that it had been a pleasure, but that we needed to get going. I could see Emrys' curiosity and worried for a moment that they would decide to linger to hear another tale from Marrow when he offered such, in exchange for more gifts, of course. They followed me back, the way that we had come into the throne room, though. We walked back along the edge of the hill, my only destination at that time being away from where we'd been, and after a few long minutes, Emrys spoke up to state simply that they weren't very fond of the tale Morrow had told them. I echoed the feeling. Hand rested on Briar's flank as we walked. I realized that we were unconsciously heading back to the house. I didn't realize that we were heading unconsciously back to the house until we stepped out into the clearing of it. I invited Emrys in for tea, but they declined with a soft shake of their head. I caught the way they looked towards the house for a moment and saw that same sort of lingering quiet sadness cross their features. Again, I had the urge to push for information, but I stopped myself once more. I hope that perhaps Emrys can be a friend. I don't want to ruin that with overzealous pushing about something that clearly seems sensitive to them. I've chosen to rationalize it as this. Emrys is now aware that I am looking for and hoping to help the former witch of the area. A witch that they seemed, at least by my limited insight to their demeanor could tell, to have once been friends with and cared for. Certainly, if they felt there was something they knew or found out that may be relevant in finding her, they would tell me. We parted ways, then, as Emrys said goodbye to Briar and me before fading back away into the woods. I made a notation on the map of what we had found at the marked location. I still can't shake the sense that the tale was familiar in some way. I wonder about Morrow as well. Had the previous witch visited him there before? It would seem likely given the marking for the spot was a quill, which would make sense if she'd been told a previous tale there herself. But my previous impression had been that Morrow had just been arriving to High Rannoc when I first met him. Maybe he'd actually just been returning. Maybe he knew where the previous witch was, but I had no doubt he wouldn't be forthcoming with information if he did. April 20th. I've done little but think over the details of Morrow's tale the last few days. I felt more and more certain that there had to be a clue within it, and I think I may have possibly found it. It's a thin connection, though, if it's truly anything at all. I've been reading through the book the Folly had given me, trying to detail out the notations from the previous witch as I go. I paused as I was going back over the list of noted details last night and saw jotted down, Knight's Banner, rose encircled with serpent. I had to search to find the page where this notation had shown up, and I found it when we first meet one of the heroes in the story. I had thought it was a small detail to highlight when I came across it, so early in the story. Now it felt like a beacon whose meaning I couldn't understand. Is there a connection between the book and Morrow's tale? I've been following along with the witch's notations and been focused on the fact it seemed she believed the story took place near or in High Rannoc. There's been some details that even I picked up on that shared some similarities with the area, despite not being nearly as familiar with it as she would have been. Would that mean there's some connection between Morrow's tale, the book, and the history of High Rannoc? And if so, what would that have to do with the witch's disappearance? I feel I am left with more questions than real answers still. I heard a knock on my door around noon, interrupting my attempts to decipher all of this. It was honestly a welcome break, as I'd been buried within these details for far too long to make any sense any longer. The card suit drawn for the patient was the hearts, which makes them a local. The card drawn for the ailment was a 5. When I opened the door, I found an individual who I thought at first was wearing some sort of fur vest. They looked uncomfortable in it, clearly too worn, as they shifted from foot to foot and looked sheepishly back at me. I invited them inside as they introduced themselves as Siobhan. Their voice was a soft but low timbre as they explained that they hadn't really minded their affliction much during the freezing winter months. It had kept them warm even when they'd been out tending to their flock, and had intimidated Triple a few times when it came their way. Now that it was warming up, however, it had started to make it harder to properly tend to their work as she overheated quickly. It had taken a little bit of time for me to fully realize that the it of Siobhan's affliction was the assumed fur vest. When they mentioned that they had tried to shave it off, only to find it grew back seemingly twice as quick, that I realized they weren't wearing a fur vest. It was a thick coat of chest hair that had gotten thick enough it could rival the fleece of their sheep. I had never actually dealt with a case of Yeti chest. I hesitated to name it, as I knew it was, for some, an offensive-sounding name. It did explain the condition well, though, with the untamed growth of the afflicted's chest hair. Typically, the affliction stemmed from exposure to lichen's breath, a fungus that managed to grow best in the autumn months. They had likely gotten exposed while out with their flock. After some further questioning, they stated that they often in the fall took their sheep down to the ruins near Heroes Hollow as they fed on grasses turned sweet by the chilled nights. It was likely that the lichen's breath grew there as well amongst the decay. Asked if they were fine waiting for me to get back with the ingredients I would need to make their cure. Siobhan stated that they needed to get back to work and requested that I bring the finished cure by their house that they described as being on the west side of the village, and that it would be hard to miss. Once they departed, I checked through the previous witch's notes to check where I may best find the ingredients that would fit the bill to help before I set out. High Rannoc, case number 5, Siobhan, local shepherd, suffering from Yeti's chest. This can be treated with reagents that treat hair and lungs. Glimmerwood Grove. I aim to make my way to the lock as my final destination, but my first reagent I hope to find within the forest along the way. I needed some hair of boar, and from what I could tell within the witch's old journal, there was a thicket where boars tended to dwell, feasting on the tender greens and mushrooms that grew in the damp undergrowth. I had brought along some apple slices with the aim of earning even the temporary trust of one of the animals. Briar trailed behind me as I walked, not sticking as close as she had when we'd been exploring the day before, but she stayed in my general area, grazing from time to time herself. I didn't expect her to follow me wherever I went, but I was glad that she chose to accompany me. Event card drawn is a 2. The undergrowth had started to grow more dense, and I could tell that we must have been getting close to the thicket. Briar tried to push through to follow, I could tell that it was more difficult for her. I stopped and walked back to her as I snuck one of the apple slices. I told her to wait there, that I would be fine and would come back once I had found what was needed. Briar seemed reluctant, but appeared to accept this as she backed out of some of the brush to where she could easily stand and wait for my return. I took a deep breath and continued to push forward, glad for the long arms of my flannel as I made my way through branches snagged on my sleeves. I heard a soft grunting somewhere to the right of me, a telltale sign of a boar nearby, and worked my way carefully towards it. I brought out one of the apple slices to offer for once it came into sight. Something burst out of the bush towards me, and I fell back onto a thick bush where brambles snagged and tangled. I fought to get back on my feet with fear that the boar would gorge me, but instead, I was set upon by a group of fairies who snatched my satchel away from me. I cursed at them as I tried to free myself, extremely tired of losing things to the denizens of the area by this point, as they turned it inside out to find what I had on me. They took the apple slices, what I had wrongfully assumed would be all they'd find, and then I heard them huff as they found the dried petals of the wild rose Emrys had given me when we first met. I hadn't remembered it was in my satchel, buried down towards the bottom beneath this journal and my notes of where I'd found reagents in the area. I was worried that they would take these as well, as they seemed to decide the wild rose was at least something, but after a brief glance at both notebooks, they tossed them carelessly aside. I finally managed to free myself from the bush and a couple of new holes torn in my shirt. But the moment I took a step towards them, they gave me a sharp grin and disappeared as quickly as they had arrived. I could hear the rustle of them making their way along through the underbrush. They clearly had pathways that they were familiar with given the speed they had come and gone. I cursed angrily as I gathered up my satchel and the two notebooks they tossed aside. I found a single slice of apple left that they must have dropped, but they had taken the rest of it with them. I would have to hope that a single slice would appease a boar long enough for me to get the hair I needed. And since we lost that wild rose, that will be removed from our inventory here. Next event card drawn is an 8. Foraging points are now set to 1. I took a few moments to recenter myself and remind myself that, for once, I wasn't on a strict time crunch. Once I felt a bit more grounded again, the drumming of my heartbeat in my ears from the frustration easing back, I started on my way. It felt like the thicket was never ending though, and I'm sure I was going in circles some of the time as I tried to locate a boar. I came across a clear trail at one point after a lot of searching. It was low to the ground and well trodden with hooves, and I knew I was on the right track. I followed it back, the brush growing a bit thinner, though the forest canopy up above darkened the ground here with shadows. I thought it odd as the trees didn't seem to grow more frequent here, but the branches seemed to lean and interlock above to block out the light. I once heard a boar-like snuffle ahead, to the right of the trail, and moved towards it cautiously. If it had been fairies again, I was more than ready to swear to start carrying iron with me everywhere I go. This time, however, I saw the boar come into sight as it struggled and seemed to be snared in something. As I grew closer, it seemed to be a thick netting and clung to the animal as it struggled. It was tired, clearly had been there for a while now, and I kneeled down beside it while I made quiet sounds of reassurance. The boar looked at me frightened, but either had no more energy to try and fight and get away from me, or understood I aimed to help. I reached to try and remove the netting and found it was sticky to the touch. I recoiled, realized that it wasn't netting at all, but thick spider webs. I pulled my gloves from my pocket and put them on to keep myself from getting ensnared in the webbing myself. Then I worked to get the boar free the best I could without a knife. I knew I could take the hair I needed and leave, but that hardly felt right. I had to at least try and free the boar if I was going to take from it. It was always better to honor the things you foraged from. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end as whispers started up around me. I had made enough progress on loosening the webs that I was able to pull all but the boar's back leg free by the time they arrived. I tried to glance upward without making it obvious. I was able to catch a glimpse of the large arachnid lake in the forest canopy. The tree branches didn't grow thicker here as I had assumed. They were pulled close together by the webs of the spiders. I had strayed further than I'd intended, clearly. I hadn't realized the weaver woods ran up against the edge of Glimmerwood Grove so quickly. I acted as though I didn't realize they were there as I tried to get the boar's foot free. It still laid there listlessly, and I felt more and more certain it was too late to save it, even if I did get it free. I could make out some of the whispered words from above, their discussion of how I was trying to steal their meal, and that perhaps they should eat me instead. The skittering of others approaching made it clear my time was up. The boar gave a labored sigh, and I met its wild-eyed gaze. I could see the resignation there, and it pained me to realize there truly was nothing I could do. I leaned close, whispered a quiet apology to it as I snagged some of its fur where strands had already been pulled free by the webbing, and pulled away to stand. I fought to keep myself steady, even as I heard the giant spiders growing closer. I backed away from the boar as I declared out loud that I was leaving their meal behind and that I had meant no ill will. The whispers grew louder at my acknowledgement of them, and I had to keep myself from running. I didn't know if they would let me go without a fight at that point, but I knew running could possibly trigger them to give chase. I don't think I took a single breath until I could feel the sun reach my shoulders once more. The canopy opened up above me, and the whispered sounds of the spiders had retreated. I felt as though I had something skittering just beneath my skin as I made my way back out of the thicket. I carefully tucked the boar head into a pocket on my pouch, saying a quick and regretful thanks once again. Briar met me at the edge of the thicket where the undergrowth returned to a typical density. There was no way that she knew what had occurred inside the thicket, but she seemed to sense my mood as she rested her head briefly on my shoulder. I hugged her neck gently, rested my cheek against her side as I took comfort in her presence. Meltwater Loch. We made our way down towards the loch, and I couldn't help but glance up at the treetops from time to time, despite knowing we were putting distance between us and the edge of Weaver Woods. Briar stuck closer to me as we walked this time, even as the shore of the loch came into view. Next event card is a 9. Foraging points are reset to 0 now that we've changed locations. As we walked along the shore, looking for signs of the reddish algae bloom of Mermaid's Gift, a song drifted to us over the still surface of the loch, and before I even mentally acknowledged that the siren was once more practicing, I felt myself wading into the waters unintentionally. Briar grabbed the back of my shirt with her teeth and tugged me gently back to stop me from mindlessly wading further out. It was hard to resist the effects of the song, but I managed to call out across the water in a sort of last-ditch effort to get the siren's attention. It was partially involuntary, as I was kept from following the song by Briar, and partially a conscious effort. The song suddenly went silent at my call, and I felt the tendrils of its allure fade away. Briar still held tight to my shirt, even as I managed to back myself out of the water, my pants now soaked from the knee down. It didn't take more than a few moments for there to be a splash nearby as the siren suddenly popped out of the water next to us on the shore. That same deluge of apology came from her as she saw it was me, explained again that she was practicing and hadn't intended anything to come of it, all while looking at me with wide, excited eyes. I let her know it was fine once more, but took this chance to caution her about practicing so close to this section of the shore. Surely there were places further out in the lake where it was less likely she'd accidentally snare someone with her song. I sincerely hoped that no one else had been drawn in by her at some point that she wasn't even aware of. She offered again to get me another fish as a way to make amends. I explained that I was just looking for some mermaid's gift, and she happily exclaimed that she knew where some was and could grab some for me. She still insisted that it wasn't enough, though, and that I needed another fish, so I asked if she'd get me a golden-scaled guppy, feeling hyper-aware of the lack of space for another aquatic pet in the fossil fish's makeshift tank. She dived down at the mere mention of it, and I took the opportunity to comfort Briar, who had still not let go of my shirt, as if expected me to get secreted away. I felt less concerned that the siren would actually attempt to harm me, at least not intentionally harm me. When she returned, fish flopping in hand along with a clump of the mermaid's gift algae, I worked with her to get them both secured in their own separate jars. The fish stared at me wide-eyed through the glass as it floated in the murky water, as it seemed shocked at its sudden change in circumstances. Knowing I had more time, I lingered this time in an attempt to get more familiar with Siren. I asked her name, and she seemed to light up brightly at the request. Her name is Genemee, and she apparently is the only siren in this northern part of the loch. She said more lived further south along the far shore that wasn't in sight from this point due to the size of the lake. They didn't tend to travel up this way because of the proximity of the town, but Genemee had wanted to explore and find the chance to make new friends who could tell her about their travels. I sat on a log on the beach as we talked, Briar finally being convinced to let go of me, though she lingered close by. Apparently, even among her family of sirens, who was known to be less aggressive than those I previously ran across near the Tamira Sea, Genemee was a bit of an exception. Where her family was willing to maintain distant but mostly cordial relations with inhabitants near their shores for the sake of keeping a balance, Genemee had longed to have real friendships to satiate her desire to hear more about the adventures that could be had on land. I got the sense that she hadn't been in this area for long yet, given Follux seemed to be the only other she had come across, that she was aware of, at least, as I do still worry she's snared people without realizing. I still asked if she'd known the previous witch, explained that she was missing, and Genemee shook her head sadly that she couldn't help. I felt more at ease with her by the end of our conversation. She had done most of the talking in that fast-paced, bubbling way of hers. The deluge of small details and exclamations proved to be endearing as the conversation progressed. I felt more assured that she really did just want to make friends. Briar nudged me at one point, and I realized that it was mid-afternoon. Between my struggle in the thicket and my lingering conversation with Genemee, the time had passed quickly. I told Genemee that I needed to leave, and she seemed hesitant for our conversation to end. I did advise her again it might be best if she went further out if she wanted to practice her song in the future, and hinted at the fact that she may not be aware if she pulled someone in by being too close to the shore. I saw a moment of wide-eyed realization in her, and she looked troubled as we parted. I hated leaving her with that sudden fear that she had done something unknowingly, but it was best that I make the possibility known to her. I could tell on the walk back the adrenaline from my run-in with the giant spiders had worn off. I felt exhausted on the way. I leaned against Briar's side as we walked, and still, when we reached the house, I got started on making Siobhan's cure. Waxing salve. This potion has a +1 to the +1 poison. Ingredients are hair of boar crushed and mermaid's gift ×2 boiled. Step 1. Rinse the mermaid's gift in hot water to ensure no lingering parasites cling to it. Once thoroughly cleaned, add the mermaid's gift to 3 cups of water in the cauldron and bring to a boil. Cover and let continue to boil for 10 minutes. Step 2. While that boils, take the boar hair and wash it in cool water. Pat dry and then place the fibers in your mortar along with a small handful of grinding pebbles to aid in the process of breaking down the hairs. Crush and grind until the fibers have frayed and broken down. Step 3. Once the mermaid's gift has boiled for 10 minutes, remove from heat and strain out the liquid. Keep both the boiled algae and liquid. Step 4. In a small canister, mix equal parts of boiled algae with the crushed boar hair. Step 5. Add some of the algae broth to the mixture in small quantities till the overall consistency of the mixture is a paste. Step 6. Let paste cool completely and it will solidify into a waxy salve. Step 7. Have the afflicted apply the salve liberally to the overgrown chest hair 2 times a day for a week. The salve will help stop further growth. The hair will begin to shed after the 2nd day. Any lingering effects should clear up after the week of use. Step 8. Patients should not use the salve for longer than 2 weeks to prevent poison buildup. I was exhausted by the time I had finished with the salve, and it was growing dark. It was tempting to wait until morning to deliver the salve, and likely would have been all right if I had. It was my own fault, though, that I had taken so much of the day to put together, and I didn't want to leave Siobhan waiting and wondering for the night. I told Briar to stay behind at the house this time, as I followed the directions to where Siobhan lives. I cut through town along the way. Life still lingered in its streets as vendors tried to get one last sale, and people made their way home from whatever toils had drawn them out for the day. I found Siobhan's house on the west side of the village, just as they said I would. It was indeed hard to miss, a warmly lit home just on the edge of town with paddocks filled with sheep who were clearly settled in for the night. I knocked on the door and was greeted by a woman who was around my age. She smiled widely as if I was an old friend and invited me inside as she called for Siobhan. The house smelled of lanolin and herbs. There was a chill inside, though, and I noticed that the woman who introduced herself as Siobhan's partner, Mary, had on a shawl as though to stave off a lingering chill. Siobhan appeared from upstairs and gave me a surprised welcome, as they stated they hadn't expected me until morning. I explained that I felt I shouldn't keep them waiting, and handed over the waxing salve with careful instructions on its use. I noticed Mary paid close attention to the instructions I gave, and she noted that she'd make sure Siobhan followed them closely. They invited me to join them for a late meal. Siobhan had only gotten back from the meadows with the flock a short while ago. I accepted, tired enough not to feel my normal hesitancy at opposing, and we sat. I allowed myself an evening of not trying to search out any clues. A night of just allowing myself to enjoy the company of Mary and Siobhan, who proved to be wonderful hosts. Siobhan was softer spoken than Mary, but they both shared stories of their days. and the general gossip around town. I was apparently a hot topic still, people curious about me and how I would serve as a healer. I told tales of times on the road in turn in a way that I thought would make me long even more for my traveling days. Instead, I found myself looking back on my travels fondly, but with a hint of relief, maybe. Am I becoming content with settling here? Certainly, it had proven to be more interesting than I had originally thought, but I find myself missing the road less. The realization was sudden and surprising for me. It was late by the time I left. Siobhan offered to walk me, but I shook my head no. I wanted to walk on my own in the dark for a bit, and let me have some time to contemplate and organize my thoughts. I've started to wonder just what I may do once the former witch is found. I feel no closer to solving her disappearance than I was when I first arrived. Perhaps it would be best if I started contemplating what I will do when the moment arrives. Marcius. With that, our inventory will update to include that golden guppy. And then, since we successfully cured Siobhan, our reputation will go up to 8. And since that potion contained a point of poison, I get paid a little less. Let me double check what the difference is. So it reduces the reward by 4, so the normal reward is 20 at this point, since I'm still a novice. So I will get 16 gold. I'm again not going to bother to do the math in my head. So we are up to 85 gold. I am going to start taking a look because we can buy more tools. So I'm going to take a look and see if we're getting close to being able to afford any. We are. So I will have to think next week which one we might want to get. The ones we can afford is a sickle, which is 50 silver, and it helps increase foraging points by 2 instead of 1 with each turn. I can afford a Nathame, which is 80 silver. It is needed in order to use the ritual circle in the village. Or I can afford a coracle, which is 70 silver, and that allows me to travel to a new location called the Blastfire Bog. So I will have to contemplate that, and then in our next session we can take a look at what I want to get, if anything, for Marcius. But yeah, so this was the first week of new gaming. I did just do 1 week in game for this. I'm still gonna stick with that rather than trying to move up to 2 weeks per game. Both just realistically taking the time to play through the round. Took time enough in the week to try to get through 2 rounds in a week may be a little difficult. So, and I feel like each week is going to get longer just because things are going to start tying together. We're going to get to know more people within the town. So, I'm going to keep it at just 1 week per actual, game week. But I appreciate everybody stopping by. I did remember, so in that very first week, I did make a mistake. Marcius was going to just try to use a ingredient for both parts in a potion to cure the dragon sickness. We didn't end up curing it anyways because they ran out of time. But there is a note within the guide that a reagent can only be used for one of its tags. So if it has multiple tags, it can only be used for one of those in a potion at a time. So I was trying to use the sea beast saliva for both tags to help cure the ailment of dragon sickness, and I technically wouldn't have been able to do that. But we didn't manage to do it anyways, so we're good. We're kosher. But yeah, I am really enjoying this. We are now up to reputation level 8. Once we reach level 10, we can start doing the intermediate. Oh, we have to reach 11, and then we can start doing intermediate spell ailments to help cure. But yeah, thank you to anyone who stopped by. This one will be uploaded to YouTube as well. It may not get up there tonight, but the other two I am aiming to get up there tonight. And thank you guys so much if you stopped by. I hope you have a good night. Thanks.